Hola, so teni terang atsundni oba teni yami teni noshokomeang kala kansumdu teni indi samala teni gomo delaka samdujigin.
Tonight we have many Tibetans in the audience and Chinese people and some Westerners too. First, I'd like to begin by saying good evening to everybody here.
Teni terang atso teni mamampo nyamdan zomni teni samala teni atso teni chu tone samala teni kavdashikin teni shongwala teni une jane teni sem pe me pa teni gabo shonsong.
And I'm extremely happy to have this chance to engage in conversation with everyone on the topic of the Dharma.
Teni tambi chuze andana teni ngatso roa miru teni shertang tsangma teni ta teni longshot teni zu teni rete na ngatso teni poba yenanja teni gya yenanja noshoko me yenanja teni mosatang sizina teni ngatso tambi chu toni shanna tambi chu teni nyambi kapsa teni chigto yewa chiji yomare.
When we're listening to the Dharma, in terms of the Dharma, then there are no distinctions between whatever ethnicity we are, whether that be Tibetan or Chinese or Western or whatever.
Teni sarji jomden de chuze and teni shertang go roa simchen tamche pola teni to pantoya ta teni re ma to pa ta tinala yang to chu murko yewan jata yakub go yewan jata teni chu ngaso ti pakpakaro ta no ho yewan jata teni go yewa mambo yo mare.
So when we're talking about the Buddha Dharma, it's really about benefit to all sentient beings, benefit to all people. There's no distinction drawn on the basis of a person's ethnic background or country or the color of their skin.
Tani ngaso terang dana tani to mo changma ngaso nyamden zomni tani jayin nanda poyin nanda nshokoma nanda changma nyamden zomni tani ngaso tani to ta khavdashia ti tani chude tani to ngaso changma la tani ta sizg tani nyanda nyam choya sizg nyamselin na nyamselin choya tani mo sizg nyamselin na sosorang ka semla tani pantongken ta tani zgim bi gimsin ji.
So today we've all gathered here to listen to the Dharma. In this situation, anyone who wants to listen is entitled to do so. Anyone who wants to implement the practices, apply the practices, is entitled to do so. It's a situation of complete equality.
Teni terang acho teni chat go teni khapshang da kangrezena ta tapali garwaz ya tere yana tapali ndebaz ya teni zre.
So the topic of this evening's teaching is transcending faith or going beyond faith.
Teni tapali ndebaz kita ngacho kangriz la je yore zena teni ngacho nangba ga teni chuto teni tapa kyangba ga teni thone teni rogo ya teni marezi kachares.
So what we're really talking about tonight in this talk is about going beyond just having a faith-based approach to our Buddhist practice. Of course, we're not saying that in order to be Buddhists we don't need faith. We're not saying that faith is not needed. Indeed, to practice the Dharma, of course we need faith.
Teni ngacho nangba chunda teni ta tapa kyangwas ka ota teni injiri samji teni tapa kyangwas mayembar teni soso teni samlo tang shapa jav teni shina teni soso teni koa yakpo loyongji yongken teni ziyembala teni zegayore.
What we mean when we say that we can't, that we shouldn't practice just by faith alone is that in addition to faith we need to have a mind that sets to inquiring the Dharma, investigating it, and on this basis obtaining a proper understanding.
Tani chuzeyata tani tendiga tani ta susu samlo tangna tani gimtsin ga thoni tani samlo tang chokba tani ziyin charti tani nga zo zambalang ga sharshoko mayin nanja nashoko mayandra musudang suzina teni to korang samlo tong shinken ka teni yin charti teni o tanda yang ta bare samba ka teni kuat teni susu suzuken na teni len thupgare.
The Dharma is something that anyone, anywhere, whether they're from the West or from Asia, can all understand through their own rational reasoning faculties. They all have the capacity to think and contemplate on the Dharma and arrive at an understanding of its meaning.
Teni tapa kyangbazi ka thoni teni tanro gonas ta nga so yindamda ta teni yengare yichi gore tapa she gore zikite ma topa jamba tapa she gowi jimsun shaki mena teni kharsang terang ti chundala teni pe kabores tapa ke gona kabore chula lob gona kabores.
So even though we might talk about the necessity of belief or faith, without knowing the reasons for, in fact, why we should have this faith, then in the current day and age, not having a reason-based approach makes arousing this faith quite difficult.
Teni namba ga teni chundela teni ta kandi rezena teni tokba mambo kina techo mambo yona teni jendi techo mambo yona deli denjas ke yapu yore sone teni songo yores.
In fact, the Buddha viewed doubts and questions as a very positive thing.
Nga so teni tapashi gore teni tokba yona nduk mare teni techum yona nduk mare teni songo mare techum chenjandi gandhi techum mambo yona denji ga teni yapu yore sone namba ga teni songo re.
The Buddha never said that we have to have faith. Questions and doubts are not permitted. Quite the reverse. The Buddha was emphatic that doubts and questions, regardless of what they may be, are all to be welcomed.
Teni nga chon zambalang ge chu kang dang kang yin na shirtang changmala mang de changmala chu zine teni ge mang zi teni ta tak yore zi changmala sharshok la yang chu ze yore nashok chu lu na chu lu zi pi mang de changmala jikpare.
In terms of the term religion, this is a word that's used to describe religious traditions in both the East and West. Religion is a word or a term that's used across the board.
Ke yinna yang nga chu dong toni teni ta dan zambalang ge sharshok chu da nashok chu la teni jikpa yang yore masjid sa yang yore nangdong toni teni jawa yang yore manjawa yang yore.
But in actual fact, in terms of the content of religious traditions in the East and West, there are both similarities and indeed differences.
Tendri yenti teni ta nangba ga teni chuti teni ta khojini janda madawa te chik kandere zena teni toba mangbo yo na teni yakbo yo re zene teni zegre pena teni sarje ga teni songba yin nanja teni jamba ga teni songba yin nanja soso la te yin mayin samje ga teni toba mangbo yo na te yakbo yo re teni songres.
So one of the distinguishing features of Buddhism vis-a-vis other religious traditions is that doubts and questions are considered in a very beneficial and positive light, whether they're directed against the sayings of the Buddha himself or against things that, or in respect of things that other people have said.
Yinayang teni topa te tambo topa yogo gore teni sasoranga samlo tang shapa gyamni teni jini te topa te par teni sar to gore topa te par teni mebashi to gore.
Of course, we need to have doubts or questions in the future, but the aim is through our own process of contemplation and investigation to resolve these doubts. So our ultimate aim is the resolution of doubts.
Teni karte topa te par mebashi matana teni ta topa yona yakbo yo mares.
Of course, if we're not able to resolve our doubts, then the existence of our doubts, the ongoing existence of our doubts, is not a good thing.
Pena topa chik teni saranga semka nala topa kini teni topa te par teni chud matana topa te mebashi matana teni shawa kandang kang na teni nga chu nyese te la topa ta ta shina ta teni shina enju mundu ayin mayin samne teni ndu ke ma topa teni shawa kang le guna le thok maris.
If we have enduring doubts in our minds, doubts that we're not able to resolve, then it is a burden on our mind no matter whatever we do. If we are essentially acting, constantly asking ourselves, wondering whether what we're doing is the right thing to be doing.
대 인사티 되니 가서 되니 다 똑바자와니 고 말에 되니 가서 다바씩 보고 저거래 되니 다바 작고를 마토바 똑바 유년 그 말이 대충 유년 그 말이지나 대형 말이.
So we are certainly not saying that doubts are not permitted, not saying that doubts are not okay and that we just need to proceed with faith alone.
되니 영 똑바 요거래 녀석씩 보텔라 똑바 딱딱한 돈이 되니 내고래 태숨 딱딱고래 똑바 딱딱한 돈이 내고래지나 대형 판독요 말이.
But we're not saying at the same time that one needs to live completely on doubt and questions alone. This would be the other extreme.
더나 간디 고거래지나 당보 가서 강당 강라요나 똑바요나 약보래 똑바 고래스.
So what we are saying is that at the outset, in the very beginning, having doubts is a good thing.
되니 똑바텔라 삼로 만보 땅네 되니 똑바데 팔 매바시 탑소나 되니 약보래로 그래스.
And that after having these doubts, by contemplating on them and thinking about them, eliminating them is what we really want to strive to do. And this is the Buddhist view. In terms of the Western tradition, there are two views on this. There are some people who would say that doubts and questions in relation to religion are not permissible. And then there is another school of thought, say skeptics, who view doubts and constant questioning as the way that people should go. But the Buddhist approach is not either of these two extremes. It's not saying that doubts are not allowed, and at the same time it's not saying that we should have doubts only. It's about having doubts in the beginning, resolving them through our own investigation, and then on having resolved these doubts, generating a sincere belief and faith as a result.
Tani zea tomba sanji shakya thapa sanji chumdun dete korang ngone tane korang gasa mata gangre zena tani korang rangla tapa shinkin le lauz ka sanji o sanji sombare ta ti injiri samne tani ka tapa shi shaksa ta sanji tu gisa ngomate korang gasa ngomate te marez.
So the kind of the Buddha in fact does not prefer a person who has an easy or ready faith.
Wana sanji korang gasa gmnyong ngomate garezena sanji ga songina tela tokba shi samlo mambo tangni teni ngoni tangni niligla teni ta yichingen gmtela sanji gagrez.
So what the kind of person or practitioner that the Buddha in fact does value higher than that is the person who takes what the Buddha has said and really investigates it, examines it, critically appraises what the Buddha has said.
Teni di gimsante sanji chomden de teni do nangla saru songyore.
And the reason for this the Buddha clearly stated in the sutras.
Tenim do telak kariz garezena teni gau ngartenji pimdo zene tenim pak de gangao tenim ngartenji papaimna simjin nam teni pamagate machine jima teni kiwashima ngartenji na condition injikare sone teni logic sha sa dozi yore tela gau ngarji kum dozi yore tinangla teni song yore.
And the sutra in which the Buddha spoke on this is called Ananda's Instructions on Entering into the Womb Sutra.
Teni tinangla kari sondgzena teni sanji chomden de teni gangaola teni kaja teni sondgze gangaoze teni khorang ta nga 교랑 것들이 똥바임 바당 되니 nga 교랑 것들이 다 길근이 바당 되니 nga 교랑 그 예사임 바당 된디스 김선신이 되니 교 nga랑라 연 마치야 손에 된디 김선 대 김선도 신이 교 nga랑라 이치나 야보요 말에 손에 된디 송도스.
And what the Buddha said to Ananda in this sutra was that you should not believe what I say, or you should not believe in me just on the basis that I am your teacher, I am your guru, or for the reason that I am your relative.
Dana kandi gogorezina tini kyorang rang tini nge shapi kaja tela kyorang rang tini samlo thone tini tashitji kyorang rang tini samlo thong tashitji ta tini kyorang yichi yong gore ma to ba nge shapare tindi yang tak ba injere samne tindi kyu machi sone tindi sone ores.
You should instead generate your belief based on your own investigation and examination of the things I've said, not solely on the basis of the fact that I am the one who said it.
Tani kajati nani ta karize go yorezena tani sanji chumdende tani songna ta pena sanji go loma namla tani nga kyorang so tani to girgen reze ta ti indi tani kyorang so ngala yechi go reze ni tani songo yo mares.
So what the Buddha was saying is to his students, you shouldn't just believe in what I say or believe in me on the basis that I am your teacher.
Tani nga kyorang so tani tombare na tani kyorang so ngala tani yechi go rea nge sezena te kyorang so yechi go reze ni tani tsawani songo yo mares.
Nor was he saying, you should believe in me just because I am your guru.
Tani sanji go sona ngarang ko shapa tela gimsun dukta mundu tani kyorang rang ko kale chi tani samlo tongda tani kyorang ko tani ha ko yong gore tani kyorang yichina ya boyo re sone tani songo yo res.
What he was saying is that you, my students, need to carefully investigate what I've said and see whether it corresponds with reason. And if you arrive at an understanding that it does, then you can generate your belief in me on this basis.
Tani yendi tani nga so tani namba ko tani ta lerka leluk te tani ta saruk tani ta lerka leluk ta nika tani lelu chikpan rapore saruk thone yena korang ko jimsun yota meta tani saru tagne tani jimsun yona tani yechi jogore ma to pa jimsun mena ota injere samne tani tapa che mare saruk yang te re tani nga so namba yang te ta chikpare dos.
So we can see from this that Buddhism operates in a way that is in accordance with the scientific method too. Science similarly works according to whether or not something has been reasonably proved, whether there is a reason or not.
Tani tendi yendi terang aso tani tapali garwa se goya te jimsun teres tapali ndepa tapali garwa se gui jimsun tere ma to pa tapa go mare te tonda mare.
So the reason today that we're talking about going beyond faith or transcending faith is precisely this. We're not, it should be clear, saying that faith or belief is not needed.
Tani tapat shirtang go reta ina tapa zirate te mundu kanro go rezina takshit te mundu go res tapa mundu takshit go res.
So of course we need faith, but what we're saying is that prior to faith we need to engage in investigation and examination.
Shirtang tapa zina shirtang karela zego zina tapa zina yichi te la zego yorezi shirtang tapa la mambo shaki yoreta zu te tapa zina yichi la tini tapa zego yorezi.
We often talk about faith, use the word faith, but really what faith is referring to, the core of this idea is belief.
Teni yechi guna teni ngaso kari yechi go jimsun kang go ni nga yechi go ore zena o ta sanji go songware te yechi go ore on the chu na la songware te yechi go ore teni sha teni marezi.
And if we're going to talk about why we should believe in something, we're certainly not saying just because it's something the Buddha said or that's what the religious tradition said. We're not suggesting that this is a compelling reason for the arousing of faith.
Teni tendi insarti teni namba sanji wa teni chula lojong shen go muzginna teni pena tharuk pa ga po shin jimsun go ni tela jimsun dugta mundu soso go samlo mambo tang teni soso go mashi wa te chola toba mambo lang jwa mambo shin teni kale rang teni o tate rendu gimtsun do samni teni rang yichin ro re ti yichi patela teni tapase gres.
So as a student of Buddhism, we need to proceed as a scientist would in their endeavors, and that is by doing a lot of investigation, doing a lot of inquiry, and judging for ourselves whether or not what is being said conforms with reason. And if we find that it does, then the belief we have in this can be referred to as faith.
Teni tinji teni tapatela teni namba na ti tapatela garese ozina tela gimsun shipi tapa zeni teni zego yore teni ti tapata pe yakboya res.
And this kind of faith that we generate through this process can be referred to as a faith generated through understanding, or an understanding-based faith. And this is a very positive kind of faith to have.
Teni tenji tapata teni ngacho samala go res teni tapata yoga res.
And this kind of understanding-based faith is the kind of faith that we all need.
Teni tenji tapatela teni te shirb tang dambi tapa zena shirg tang dambi tapa zena teni gimsun yopi tapa zena chikpare o tenji nil yongkhang tapa res te.
So this kind of faith, an understanding-based faith, is a faith that possesses reason. It's a faith that is possessed of wisdom.
Teni tenji tapata ngacho masosola teni te go res.
And it's this kind of faith that all of us need to cultivate.
Tenji tapata gowi gimsun kang resina teni ta ngacho garte tapata mesona teni ngacho machama gate sem kanala tongba ra wo teni to chayo re tensa ta tensa ra boyo maris tapata sem kanala mena teni ngacho la tensa chik yo maris.
And the reason that we need to have this kind of faith is because if for some reason we lose our faith, then we are literally without any support at all. We are in a state of complete emptiness.
Tini tirap jogit pada tirap jirga pagan nangla tini nafshok pagan nangla tini kaja chiksha nyongare zin nafshok orgne nani kaja chiksha pare kaja kangsha pare zina tini ngacho pamjur te yarge chimbo soni tini mutsama tini shikpo re sona. During
the 18th and 19th centuries, a view emerged in the West which held that as society materially progresses and flourishes, we will no longer need religion. And this viewpoint, finding its origin in the West, gradually spread to other places around the world. So as a result, there are many people now around the whole world, both in the East and the West, who embrace this idea or hold this idea that as the economy or as material life flourishes, we no longer need religion. This is written in many books. It's a pervasive view.
Tani tata nga su tirib nishi tsachik paga nangla ma tsangma la tini tirib jirga pada jorgi pala tana tini nga su pamjur kutone halipa tini yargi song tsarri tana tini na ta terang nga su tsangma la tini chu murgo zini tsangma ga semga nangla chu murgun kan tini zireo go resi kaja ti demba yinna.
If this viewpoint were in fact true, then today, as we are in the 21st century with such a materially developed world, we would no longer be needing religion at all.
Rite terang ngacho utini semga dangla chu murgowa matsat ta terang ngacho la dewi kyang chu gowa tini zgat nesir tini zreyoris.
But in fact, the situation we are in is not only one of still needing religion, but in fact needing it even more than we ever have. The reason being that actually in our society these days there are even more problems and conflicts than there ever were.
Tani mudang magawar la tani ta yang ngaso tani ta pansan chik la tani ta shamdang nya jishi pandraw ta so mepa reni tani yang garwa ta tani mambo yung yore.
And in general, kindness and compassion between people is on the decline, and there are a lot of conflicts between people.
Tani manam gatini sem ganala tani deshkit ko chora de mepa reni te chama sem market patang mavdiwa tani mambo tani re yore.
And there are many people who have lost all sense of happiness and exist in a quite unhappy state of mind.
Tani lo trikchu denche tang tani ya ni ya ga tani konror ta tani nga chu manam ga tani sem ma ke pa ga na ni so ta kan yong ga du zena za ke me pa ta ko nge me pa ta pamjur me pa ga thon yong ga yores.
In years gone by, say half a century or a century ago, the main reason for people's suffering or mental suffering was a lack of material necessities like food and clothing, etc.
Tani tarta nga chu tani ta sem ga thon le nga chu tani dungor mambo zo yong ga ki to tani za ke me kan ta ko nge me kan ya tarta jambalang ga thon la mambo yore ta yin na yang mo mang chi wa te tani za nga chu dungor to tani za ke me wa ta ko nge me pa ta pamjur me pi jimsin ki mare.
Even though there are still a lot of people in the world today who experience livelihood, great challenges in terms of their livelihood, the vast majority of suffering is not derived from a lack of food to eat or water to drink or clothes to wear.
Tani yang nafshok ko tani sanir pa tani katak chan namgi yang kaja chikshan yore ti kaja ta pe jimsin yore.
A well-known philosopher made a very compelling comment on this.
Ti jimsin ti kaja te tini sarje ga tini sompa tani ka chigre nindos.
And this comment was essentially the same in meaning as the words of the Buddha.
Tani ti kaja ti nala karisha yore zina tini nga chu mus dan sayin na yang tini susu rang tini dopa zu tini ta rang semla tini ta ngupo kang zu tini rang pe na tini ta jichimbo ren do na da pon chimbo wangcha yo ba tini ren do na da yana ka tak chan ren do na da tini ti tondang la sem gna la tini dopa zu yo ne tini ti tond tini chun ne tini ta nyama chigla garti nguni chorang shibo yinna yana wangcha yo ba yinna yana tini ka tak cha yinna tini re sonas.
And this comment was in essence about if an individual pursues the desires in one's mind single-mindedly, whether that be for riches or power and privilege.
Tani karti nyama chigla tani chorang do pata nguni tani tani drip sona tani ta chu langsang tani ta pe na ngamaina katak de yona yak po kepo re samni khorang katak zona kepo yan sare sam ngamaina tani ta shibo re sona shibo chang sona kepo yan sare sam tani sam de re ta nguni tani nyama chigla tani shibo chang katak yo ba chak sona tani ta langsang tani ta tela nyambo munduk samba ja wuliao o langsang tani ta nyambo me pa tani ta market pa tani chang do res chorang do pa tan dripti tani langsang market pa chang do res ni tani shayores.
So if, in fact, we single-mindedly pursue these things, have our minds or believe in our minds that by fulfilling these desires, whether it be for riches or status or whatever, then in the event that one day these desires, these dreams of ours come true, as soon as we fulfill our desires, they will immediately become extremely meaningless for us.
Soso tini dopa tini tini rang semla yopi kavsa tini dopa te endrep ti tondagla tambo kavli jab ne tini kavli jab gori ti nekmna tini ta koranga tini ta dopa ten drip sona korang kebo yongore samne tini sam gore yenna yang dopa ten drip ni tini resondi tini langsang o tini ta kebo mayongwa tini ta nga ngune ngama sambata te kepo ere samna te maim bata te lamsang teni konro ores.
So while at the point that one is still striving towards that goal, striving to fulfill that desire, one thinks to oneself that upon achieving it, one will definitely feel happy. at the moment one does actually end up fulfilling that desire or getting what one wants, then immediately the feeling of happiness that one would expect to feel, in fact one does not feel. It's lost and one feels quite meaningless and unhappy.
Tate pejana kandi rezena pena ngaso tambo tini ngaso changbo impine kabna kandi samgrezena ta nyamachigla tini ngarang la gormo kaji gonayang kaji yoje tendis chaksona tani ta ngap deke pusum chokbari dore ngap peke pozi injere nga mare pa chichiyo ke mare samne tendi samgrez ngaso ti gormo to maybe kapse tendi samgrez.
It's like when we're in a state of poverty, when we're poor, we think, oh, if there were one day when I had as much money as I needed, when I was really rich, then I'd be so happy.
Tanita nyamachila ngoni tane korangla tani gormo gaji gonayang kaji yo patendi gatini shupo chimbos chaksona tani ti kapse tani korang ngama sambatar tani ta ngoni ta demo chipo resong ta mare pa chichime manyem pa chichime ta pansam chokswa tindis yeng orizena zawani yeng mare korang sambata yeng mare ti kapse.
However, on that day that one might achieve this state of riches, having all that one could dream of, then the happiness that one originally thought one would feel at this time doesn't arrive at all.
Teni ti monta tini koranga tini garirezi koranga ta nga gormo mampozo na nga tini keporendo ore nga deke pansum chokbarendo ore sambi jimsun ta gangrezina ti kapse tini koranga tini gormo yobati chindizi ha ko marezi gormo yo nyung manduze korang tambore te na gormo kazi gona kazi yobati ndizi ko thola ko mutsi gangbola tindi ga shigpo chak nyong mare mangyongna ta korang kipo injire samne injire sambare ma topa te ko chaji yo mare ti jimsin jires.
And the reason that in fact a person would have this belief that one would feel happy upon fulfilling one's desires is precisely because until this point one hasn't experienced the state that one's striving for. So if one's poor, for example, one hasn't known what it's ever like to be rich. So the expectation or the hope is in fact based on the fact that one has never experienced this state.
Teni nyamachigla teni ta gormo mambo to yone teni ko ramshikpo chaksonde teni ko lamsang shine o ta gormo mambo yona nge hale pa kepozi injire teni ta mare pa chichi yo ke mare samda ta tendizi yare madu tarong mare pa ta manduk pa ta manyem pa mambondu tarong yo dumar mambondu sambagote koranga hako ore.
Yet when one eventually does become rich, then one very soon discovers that in fact happiness continues, suffering continues, all kinds of problems endure, and that money is not the answer to it all.
Teni te hakong kante ti jimsen te hakong kante ngason roami lorji gu thola teni mogni ores mogni gu ta hakores.
In terms of human history, there are two kinds of people who have arrived at an understanding of this way.
Mogni to serezena chikto teni lortong cha ni ta ngabja ko do shon sanji shakja ta bagare korang te hako yore korang ko song na la te chama teni hale pa saroshi ni sonja yores.
Well, the first person, individual who understood this truth was the Buddha 2,500 years ago, who in his teachings very clearly taught about how this truth operates.
Teni ni pat teni tarta ngaso teni ta chapartan zamalong nurshogla teni ta charik pa nam ki teni mambo la teni takshipshini ta gormo yo na shipo chakna demo kipo rendu ta mandu zeni takshipshi kaps teni ta gormo yo pa ta manamla deki yung mandu zeni teni mambo charik pa so shiore ni pat teres.
And the second type of person particularly people in the West, and particularly, say, scientists who, through their own investigations as to whether, in fact, material flourishing and money brings happiness, discover, in fact, no, this is not the case. Despite our affluence and riches, in fact, we have not arrived at happiness.
Ngubu go mare, gormo go mare, teze mare, go reze, kate mena, gormo mena, tini ngasun soa kirtab mare.
Of course, this is not saying that we don't need material things, that we don't need money. Of course we do. How could we live our lives if we didn't have it?
다 원하는 가리세 그래서나 골모 가서 메나 되는 가서 소화길답고 말이고 그랬지 옛나양 가서 되니 뭐 남기더니 대기 데모다 껴보세요한테 골모 따다가나네 용거래 삼니 되니 삼나티 노라래지 대세요래지.
So what I am saying is not that we don't need money. Of course we do need so in order to live our lives. What I am criticizing is the mistaken view that money is the source of our happiness.
다니다 가서 자기메 건지메 되니 밤저당 초알라 강을 옆이 내급나 되니 가서 등을 망치 슈티 강래잖아 되니 포함막 약바당 되니 리보고 또 등을 대레스.
Of course, when we're in a state of hunger or thirst or living with inadequate clothing, etc., then the main cause of our suffering is based in these circumstances.
Tani tangaso pamjur yarje song tini soala kangar me zachi konje ganga tholaya kangar me patindi kavse tani ngaso dungmar te tani sem go tok dungmar mambo tere.
However, after we've essentially satisfied these basic material needs, then the source of our suffering is basically to be found in our own minds.
Tani lo jada niga konror to tini ngaso terang raun tini mambo zala kacha te fiamna tani mambo go tini ko along maris o kormo yonata je lonshu shibore sonata demo kibo yengere te ta demo kibo mai baz kala yo to nduk samni tini sam gres.
Of course, if 100 or 200 years ago I were to have said this to an audience like this, then nobody would have believed it. Everyone at that point in time would have thought that by reaching a certain stage of material enjoyment, then happiness would be sure to follow.
다 때랑아서 때름니시 짝식 바틴디즈라 톤살티 테니 까잔드샤나 테니 mambo즈가 어때 덴바레 삼니 텐디 당는 신로레.
However, now in the 21st century, saying something like this to an audience like we have here tonight, many people can in fact accept it for the truth it represents. And the reason that people can take on this truth, or there are two reasons that people can accept this truth.
Teni Jimson chikte kangrezena mamboz korang ngune teni ta pamjur ko tone yarje sone pe pamjur shigbo chaksarwi jis teni korang ka teni pamjur to khola demo ta kepo mayong wa ta sem ko tola tarong yang dingmer mambo yo pate korang ka nyamnyong ko goni teni ha goni o ta pamjur yo na yang tarong nga chola jambas go ndo ma to ba pamjur chibo ndo ko mando tarong sem ko tola dingmer mambo ndo zene te korang so nyamnyong ko nga cho zambalang ko yarji son sarvi yarkab namji nani teni mamboz ko tambo ha ko re teni tarta nga cho sharsho ko layong ko teni mambo te ha ko ndu ko so nyamnyong ko yo re.
The first of these reasons is the fact that in affluent societies like ours, there are many people who have first-hand lived experience of the fact that even that once one has achieved a very a certain state of material wealth and enjoyment, that suffering is something that still endures. This is something that particularly people in the West, but also in other parts around the world, have really come to realize and experience for themselves in their own lives.
Teni Jimson nipati kangrezena korangso tanglenshi pi Jimson nipati kangrezena teni nafshokla teni tsarik pa nam ko myolo ngapchi thambagarangla teni jimjig mambo shini teni ta o bamjur to yarje sona teni ngaso mo teni gormo kazi yona teni sem teni zikyo yong ndo ta mando zene teni myolo ngapchi garangla teni ta jimjig shini teni mambo jimjig shi tsari jis o ta gormo mambo yona ya teni mo sem kebo yong ko mando zene ta ko cho tsarg go ne teni ta denhwang shi tsarwares.
And the second reason that people can accept it is that after 50 years or a very long period of scientific research into whether in fact economic development or material development leads to happiness, it can be seen, or it's been proved, that in fact this isn't the case.
Tendi yin sarti teni ta Jimson nipote la teni ngaso ta pamjo ya je sonsarna ta chu go mare ka ke go mare zikite teni ngaso te dembaz mayem batang 가자데라 김섬에 받더니 가서 디름니시 다시 바나라 참아 하고 살아res.
So, on account of these two reasons, people in our 21st century can understand that the statement that when the society reaches a certain level of economic flourishing, it no longer needs religion, is in fact a very mistaken and erroneous viewpoint.
Teni mer namla gormu kazi yona demo kepo tenti yonga yongjere samdikita teni ngaso norwazrendus.
It is very mistaken, the idea that happiness exists in proportion to our economic prosperity.
Ngama teni nyahong la ina teni to chiggung apchi ngarjit ko lo ni zongte lo simchi thamba rangla lo simchi thamba rangla teni khorang so mo gir ke teni yongbte teni dabnga zena ngalo wupe o yarji sondus.
For a period of 30 years from the 1950s in Japan, the individual income of Japanese people increased fivefold.
Yena koso mo nam ke teni to ta ti chowat di pamjur teni yarji dabnga yarji songreta yena mo nam ke teni chowala tan jiksong ta yaksong ta nga chumsong samji teni nawati chumbi nawati yar 종스적 지시 소문도 다른 영적문도 다른 대고운도 간된당가문도 된당가문도 삼바마도 단지송 당아 약버리송 삼지 심그토니 소송도 바 강조한다오티 자원이 용문도.
However, despite this rapid and fivefold increase in prosperity, really no one in society felt satisfied and content as a result. In fact, the need for further acquisition, needing more of this, more of that, only continued to increase.
Tene ngacho mir ki lorji ge thola ngacho roa mir ge muir ge gindi lorji ge thola noncher mambo tini ta lerka noncher ka lerka mambo lenyong ares.
In terms of human history, a great deal of mistakes have been made.
So lorji ge thola ta na chokore zambalang ge tini kharshogla tini no shogla and noncher ka lerka mambo lene tani jini chama ota tin jig mandu tinri shina ta demo tan ke poyong ge mandu sambati tini shine ta chama ge shi charwa ge tinri lorji mambo yo ares chama ha ko jiris.
And whether or not it's history in the West or history in the East, there are many examples of humans reflecting on periods of mistaken action or erroneous thought and realizing, in fact, that that is not a good way to behave or act, decide to rectify one's actions or abstain from those actions.
Tsangma teni ta nga so teni dela yarje sona teni demo yongore teni ke boyongore samne teni ge teni samlo gormo to yona demo yongje ta tipo deche pasum so ba yongere samba ti samlo teyang teni nga cho noncher ke teni ta samlo mambuz yovina ni chigres.
And among the various erroneous thoughts or mistaken thoughts in human history, the idea that with economic flourishing so comes happiness is in fact one of these mistaken ideas.
Teni tate ko chari jis teni ta nga so ta machine de la demo dang ke po yong ya zi kan dis go re teni sam na teni ta nga so yang lam ka sarwa teni ta sam lo tang go re.
So after we've understood that this idea or this viewpoint is wrong, then what we need to do is search for a new path in order to in the direction of happiness. Of course, by saying new path, actually the path is a very old one.
teni lipo nika la teni yakboz teni ta chowa ni de semgun chowa dang lipo un chowa ni de jamnyim go goni rotopi lamka te teni lamka nguma te lamka yang takpa te bares.
And this old path is one where our material needs and our spiritual needs are kept in balance and they proceed together in a state of harmony.
Teni te sarari manduzi te sangye shakja ta ballo tong chani ta ngabya ko ni shat sarwa te res.
And this idea is not a new one, it's not a new path. In fact, it was the path advanced by the Buddha over 2,500 years ago.
Yinayang mambu zala tini tuna te sarwa res. Kan res na ta sar ko zo shivare te la mambu zala samna te sarwa res.
However, to a lot of people today, this idea, this notion is indeed a new one.
Tendi yindi tini ngarang cho chama ga tini ta nga khangba tini tini zugboyo na langkhor tini zugboyo na ngarkhang kana la gormo mamboyo na tani nga dekhi pasam sokpare rore sambi tini samlo matang rochis.
So please everybody, don't fall victim to the idea that with a big house and a nice car and lots of money in the bank, you will be happy.
Tani nga cho go tini ta pena moschi go tini ta dekhi kanani ta pamjor tang dewa yongkhen go tini dekhi ta kangre rizena charpa nam ki takshin mamboshi ni tini jingre kangre rizena nga cho go dekhi kanani gyacha chida yana gyacha chonga te nga cho pamjor lam dewa yore ma to ba jamba ta pamjor lam dewa chawane yomare zenitini shayores.
Scientists say that the connection or the amount of happiness that we can derive from material things or our economic lives is probably only 10 to 15% of our overall happiness.
Ta ona nga cho go tini dekhi kanani gyacha ch yana gyacha chonga ta tini nga cho go pamjor lam dewa yona tini tele jampi tini ta yana gyacha gupch yana gyacha gyachi kyarnga ta tani ganglan dira yores na ta pamjor dira mare jambalan dira yores.
So if only 10 to 15% is linked to our material lives, then the remaining 80 to 85% is linked to things that are non-related to these.
Tani jamba ta kangre zina tani ta pamjor mayamba nga cho tani jikting jambalan di tola tani yana simda yana ngubo da tani ma to ba jamba yo mare zi tani nga cho ngubo lam dira yong khang dekhi ta gyacha chita chongale mena tani jamba gyacha tini gupchega yana gyacha gyachi kyarnga ta tani soso sim down dira yore tele jamba lam dira yotu yo mares.
In terms of the possible sources of happiness we can have beyond material things, the only other option is happiness that we derive from our own minds. So for this reason, the remaining 80 to 85% of happiness is precisely that which we can generate from our own internal or spiritual state.
Teni lo nibya samgya kongla teni zamalang nushok ko teni ta tang khipa khashi gazena nga chu dekhi ziki ta teni ngupo go thone yong go re ma to pa teni sem gnangli teni dekhi yong go te zena dekhi tsawani mepa zeni dekhi ernin meni tawa dekhi mesa zeni dekhi tsarwari ti tondar yo mare zeti shayores.
200 or 300 years ago, it was said by thinkers that
lo nibya samgya kongla teni zamalang nushok teni khipa khashi gazena dekhi ziki ta nga cho teni ngupo longshuk ko thone yong re ma to pa so sem gnangla dekhi ziki ta sem gnani yong go re zena tani te mareze tani tsawa ni dekhi message kanala ayotaware mato tinala dekhi yomare tani zeyores.
So the idea that was put forth was that the origin or the source of happiness was to be found in objects or things external to ourselves in the material world, and that our own minds were in no ways to be seen as the seat of happiness.
Tendi gutini samluto tini ta norwa yembata nga su sama ta kale jeko jesa jexer tendo yore samluti norwa res.
But of course the fact that this idea or this viewpoint is mistaken is something that increasingly we come to understand all too well.
Teni nga so terang gutini joshinti nangla karindugzena teni tapalen de base teni sargi gutini chuto nga chon chowa nangla kandi gone teni ta nyamlim shi go re zeni teni shayore na teni ti tolange tondak chi shakayens.
Okay, so we're going to now come back to our topic of this evening, which is going beyond faith or transcending faith and talking about how to implement Buddhist teachings in our everyday lives.
Tani ngacho gol goyachig oreze gol goyachig de kangrezina tani ngacho la tani dumur mambo ztani te yongui tani ta sem ga thola yenda da lipo thola yenda da garter tani dumur mambo ztani tani yong de kinda mang chiwati tani kandam rewan de zena tani ngacho dopa sem ga ngacho dopa de la yuang zke dopa de la tani rewan dos.
So the one understanding that we all really need to have is that the source of our sufferings, most of our sufferings, whether physical or mental, is in our own desires.
Tani ndopate soso tani ndopate tani ta garta nga chu samlo tambayna tani tape na ngarang la tani langkhur yakboz tani langkhur mepi kaps tani nga so ta ngala langkhur zo na samgre ma to ba ta ngar langkhur jigbota langkhur gongchembota tani ta samgamare langkhur mepi kaps tani ngala langkhur zo na sambin dopate yoris.
It's like, for example, when we don't, in the situation of not possessing a car, when we don't have a car, thinking that if I did have a car, if only I had a car, I would be happy.
Tani chama langkhur ko ne do yo kaps tani ngarang chibola langkhur ko ya mena tani sem gana la ma ki payung gre tani ngarang la yang tang ne chokbo chodan jawa langkhur zo na nga kanti chibo yo samni dendi ga sang lo yung gre.
And if everyone around us, all our friends, they have a car and we're the only one who doesn't, then we feel quite unhappy and really wonder what we can do about this.
Tani nguni tani nyamachila tani ngarang ga chokbo chodan janda tani langkhur zo ngarang la yo sona tani nga sem ga tola tani demo chibo rendo gres.
And we think that, you know, the day that I get a car and I can be just like everyone around me, then in fact I will feel very happy.
Jete ti demo chibo zeate chikshina tani lo shekaz gla tani yongore chikshina dawa khashi la yongore chikshina zankhur chik ma to yo mares.
Of course, the feeling of satisfaction or happiness that we might achieve on getting a car and being like everybody else really only lasts a relatively short time, maybe half a year or a few months or perhaps even only a week.
Ta tini ti jini ta penda lo sheka dawasam yana zankhur chik jini kan de ro re ezena ota ngarang ga langkhur te da jamba chama ga langkhur te janda inna chamyan ramnim ra boinna tini ta ngarang la langkhur yore chama la yore samba chamma to pa ta nga langkhur yona nga ngama ina ngarang la langkhur chama dan rawo tin ji zona nga kandi chi poz yona tini sam kare ta te yo mare je ta nga langkhur yore samba tin ra ma to nga langkhur du ta nga chi pore sam ji de chi ko chorwati dehnang da kitnang de ta ni yo mare ji ti kapsa.
After a, you know, given period of time, a few months or half a year or whatever, then we no longer have the feeling of happiness associated with having a car like all of those around us. It becomes just a normal part of everyday life, something that we take for granted, no longer a source of happiness.
Ta tini ti kapsa tini nga chu tobo khashi zla tini ngarang rang langkhur tele yak tele kungchi tele zig khashi jingda ninda samda jinda tini z yo yona tini ngarang rang sem gana la marki pa chang gare.
And at this point, when a few people around us start to get cars that are in fact better than ours, more expensive than ours, more fancy looking than ours, then our unhappiness kicks in again and we do not feel happy.
Teni ti kapsa teni ta ngarang langkhur tani yoni ta ngake bore samba ta mepa machat o ngarang langkhur tang nge tobo chole langkhur le teni digren du ta nge langkhur dendi dugbo kor go re samne teni ta ti langkhur to khorang la tini sem tele kyang marke pa shin ro res.
And at that point in time, one finds oneself thinking, oh, all of these people around me are getting such nice cars and I've just got this normal car, it's inferior to everybody else's. And in this situation, the car that was once the source of your striving and happiness now becomes the source of your suffering.
Tani ta kare sam gare zena ta nge yinda manda tini nge chokbo sogo tini langkhur tin rawa zata yana tele lakbaz nge nyogo te samne tani ta yang kavle mambo yavni titon la gormo mambo so kavle mambo yavni te she gare.
And at this one starts to think, well, what I need to do is get a car the same as everybody else, a nicer car, or even better still, one that's nicer than theirs. And in order to achieve this goal, one has to exert oneself, work really hard, and make a lot of effort.
Teni tenji yendi teni ngaso langkhor la yang teni re khangba yang teni re teni ngaso lakpa thola chitsud yang re teni ngaso pesho tangya ga teni simchir yenare chircha yenare de yang re teni khemnang lan jok je jongya ga teni khemche yenare chama tenji re chikpare rolik ti chama chikpare.
And in fact, our psychology, the way it works in terms of this kind of process of desire and fulfillment is the same regardless of what we apply it to, whether it be our cars or our houses, the watches we wear on our wrist, the electrical appliances we have in our homes.
Teni ngaso tangrib ko rigni ze pat ze atela teni chun chimbo chi obate kangre zena tangrib ko rigni ndi teni korang ko tabshi njata mandra mangbo la teni munamji ndopate yar chimbo gongni gongdam perya tabshi te je yores.
And one of the really big shortcomings of modern and contemporary culture is that people's desires are continually fueled in all kinds of ways.
Teni ngaso jamlang ka sharshok la ina randare nshok la ina randare ngaso mota lam khala teni gang di njemda kwangao njemda njada mandra mambo yardu teni ngaso lokke ga nala yaran rosa lam khati la yang mat chama lokke ga teni lokke gni karma shikandra ma to go marta tela yang teni njemda mandra mambo yarta teni shini teni mun namla teni mu shigbu namjin chowa de gandhi yin teni ti gend teni tong yores.
These days, wherever we go, whether we're driving in our cars and we see billboards and advertisements everywhere, even taking a ride in an elevator, we see elevators on the walls, we're constantly exposed to images of affluent lifestyles. It's constantly put before us.
Teni tendishi yondi teni ngaso teni mo kyobo cho yena teni njemda ti so rigong wi kapsa teni ta ngeyang tendi sinyo go ta ngayang tendi mushikbo nam ko khamba ta was kana la de go ngeyang mushikbo nam ji teni langkor ta wa kor go samni teni so so ndo pa de yar deli jang yar teni kone kone perong gres.
And so when people who are not affluent or don't have these things see these advertisements, then the desire in their minds to obtain these things, to acquire these things, only grows stronger and stronger in the belief that if they did have these things, they would feel happy.
Teni tendi in sorti teni ta ngaso ta tistakta pe nan churcha ng kholung kon korshine ta ngaso jig raksa ne kamna yang remandu ta nga tele jang yags go ndugse they raksavine kamna dijang mundo ta tele jang yapos go ndugse tendi kholung kon korshine ndopa tendi ndogres.
And we end up being enmeshed in an endless cycle of desire and acquisition, and after acquisition another desire, a constantly endlessly rotating cycle of desire and acquisition.
Te mato ta nga chola o ta nga ndrik song ta nga yakbo yo song ta nge tele basum she kemen ta ngarang long shu she ne ngarang langkor nde khamba nde ta ngarang gormo te yo bandela long shu she ne teni ngarang long shu she ne ta de yen tele le jamba nge le man samni tendi korkup se sharki yo ores na tsawani muschila zambala go muschila tendi korkup teni yong yo mares.
And in this situation, virtually not even a single person in the world has the opportunity to just rest in contentment with what they already have and thinking that this is enough. I already have what I need and I don't need to exert myself beyond this.
Teni tarta terang nga chogon zambolang ka shartang nimnika shusok ganda zerezena perna teni tan tracha nalan tracha chimpu chikanala sunkor zena chilun o teni mambo teni drigne teni ta chikor ne teni yong yo andao ta teni zre ores tangsang ka teni zambolang ka teni zamlang da teni zre ti nanin khorlo chik ta mandig nin khordigna teni khorlo jamba tamje poyang mongkor kamere chama teni khorni rogo ores.
And so whether it's the West or the East, it's as if everybody is entrapped in this constantly spinning wheel.
Teni tis zawati kangrezena perna tambo tini khorlo korngang ko sonkor chilun 당보 데 강레제나 tani 당보 라오 데 강레제나 tani 당보 라오 때 tani ngaso manam 건 도파 데레스.
And what is essentially powering this wheel, like a water wheel, the energy that is fueling it is in fact our own desire.
대연 성디 tani ngaso tani 다 manam 거 tani 지 소소 거 tani 초와 대체 땅담바 tani 에용거 레와 잡네 tani 바바 mambo 레 샤와 mambo 레오레 tati 탑시티 tani 따스타가 탑시티라 노리오레 탑시티 노리오레.
So this idea that by achieving these things, by fulfilling our desires, that we will obtain happiness, is this approach, this method, is in fact very mistaken.
Teni ngajon zambolang ka sacha mambozla korik teni torlang mambo temni chisangman thongya me padang teni namka ngombo teni thongya me padang teni ngaso khawuk teni wuk teni to changma teni me pati so thamchi pu teni jingri ngamba te so gangne shongare jena te so thamchi chi zawati teni da ngaso ndopan dipshi yongare.
And so the destruction that we have wrought upon the natural environment and the pollution that we have created all have their root or source in our boundless desire.
Tendi yendi teni ngaso teni to ngone changin chuwa teni matsin teni chi soso go chi demo ta kepo tendi yong eyong samna teni ngaso ndopa koni kondem pherate marize ndopa tela te chanjin che go res.
So in order to really work towards happiness, we shouldn't do so on the basis of ever-growing desires. We shouldn't be going along the path of fulfilling desire. In fact, what we really need to do is be able to keep in check our desires to some extent.
Jete tenga chun dopa tsawani go marize ti kaja marize dopa tsawani me pas tenga so yongthap go marize.
Of course, again, this is not saying that we shouldn't have any desire at all. This is an impossible proposition.
Teni ngacho teni tartan ra poina ngacho chama teni shuso teni shurur teni longshut teni ngubo ndosola ngacho hallepa teni dangjok chimbo dangjok yichi te chi chak yores.
Where we are at the moment is at a point where we have an excessive esteem and attach an excessive importance to external enjoyment and material objects.
Teni soso teni ndopate te tsamar teni chanjin jena teni ngacho perna songkor mambo chilun songkor mambo khorko yoate teni te kale khoranda ore yongres.
So by keeping our desire in a little better check, by controlling our desires a little more, it's like slowing down this spinning wheel.
Benanga chun trcha chungkhor zgena tini koram jokpashini tini mambon khorjagna tini trcha da changma tini jombore chabore yongres.
If the wheel in fact spins too quickly,
teni te chapo mayem bateri te chamara jamu da ore gona teni ko kale khorna teni korang teni drotsat kale mari yongres.
And if it goes too fast, then it starts to spin out of control. So by spinning it more slowly, we can bring it under better control.
Teni ten raposhini teni ngachum dopata teni yargi teni compare teni tangjagna chanjin mashina teni ngacho teni shawale ka nyamasila le ka mambole go yore teni nyachik tisochik nala le ka mambon drib go yore teni ngachum chowa nonshik teni chichi rores.
If we don't keep our desires in check, if they continue to grow in an unbridled way, then the amount of work that we need to invest to be able to satisfy these desires only gets larger and larger, and we have to exert so much effort in fulfilling them.
Teni tati kapsa teni ta pernan chunkhor teni khorkim jona chawa che wa jind teni ngacho leka mambo lego teni to semganala market ba mambo yong chowala nonshik chembo yong ne teni ngacho chama sem market ni teni perna america ta ndindi pamjur yargiri ta yena semganala teni dekhi jeme ro yore semganala nat yong kan de jemang ro wigimchen de deris.
So as a wheel that is spinning at a high speed generates a great heat, so too when we are operating at such a fast and stressful pace of life, then we too generate a lot of pressure in our minds and in our lives, and as a result our happiness decreases and our mental health also diminishes as well.
Teni tenji yembati gimsanta nga zo tarta mambo zikateni hako yore jewe chesar tenji rek yore te yenna yang teni lagling katone sosorang kateni gerwa chimbo tangyo mares.
This logic or this reasoning is something that an increasing number of people accept and understand. However, in terms of actually implementing it or implementing countermeasures in their lives, not everyone is necessarily doing this.
Teni ta lagling katone te zanga zo te marang kateni marang kan chowa katone lagling la te zatamna teni yak boyong gore soso teni Kable yang teni se mepa teni sem katola demo ki boyang yongya teni yung gres.
So what we really need to do is to be implementing, actually practicing these countermeasures in our life, so that our the amount that we need to exert ourselves is lesser, and so that we can be more happy.
Ta te maina teni nga zo dopa ng khorlo tong khorne teni nga zo kable mambo jab ni teni chita teni matse zerwate te tong re nyama chigla teni nga zo mambo sak ne teni chigyang longsho ki mayo ne teni rogo re chama igne rogo re.
If we become too stuck in this constant cycle of desire, then ultimately we do this for our entire lives, but our lives are in fact extremely short, and one day, despite the fact that we've constantly been in this cycle accumulating everything, ultimately one day our life ends and we have to go.
Di gimsen te yang chama ha ko yore te na ta mamboz ga teni te soso chowa ga toni laglin la teni yak po machina gimsen ha ko acham ki phanto yo wa mare.
Of course, most people know this. A lot of people know this logic. It's not something they don't know. However, in terms of actually putting it into practice or putting its countermeasures into practice, the number of people who do this are much less.
Teni terang achon tin nangla teni to popa hale ba mambo yo sares.
Today in the audience, there are a lot of Tibetans.
Teni ngacho teni poka sachala teni to pamjur teni kyobures.
In Tibet, our economic standard of living is rather low.
Teni American rawon teni zala teni thoyona teni ta pamjur ko teni thone ngacho rikki mambo yore thongje mambo yore teni res.
Coming to America, we are immersed in a society which is affluent. We see so much riches with our eyes. We see it all around us.
Tati kapsa teni chikshina teni ngacho teni ta ngacho ngama ga teni samlo ta tan jugmandu ta ngone jangle teni tan chowa deshki tang damba zera teta teni pe na ngacho gurmo mambo sok go undu khamba chimbo chap go nyol go undu teni langkor jigbo nyol go undu chik yona ni yona sam teni tishina teni deshki ngoma te terendu ma to ba ngacho ngama ngacho bona yo pi teni samlo ta tang jugmandu samne chikshina teni ga samlo yang yong chaparis.
And maybe many people, upon arriving in America in this situation, feel that the way that we used to live in Tibet is in fact not the proper way to live. What we should be doing is really working hard to make lots of money, invest in cars and houses and that kind of thing. Many people may find themselves rejecting the way that life was led back in Tibet.
Teni te khayo mareze khame pi gemchang kang re na nga zo bobai na ja mur kang dang kang yen na teni musdang se na teni tangbo teni changbo zi yen bi ne kamna teni lower the hot ka chi teni ti gormo mambo yo teni ngubo mambo teni yo sa teni zela te lebsona teni chama teni ta chi ngubo mambo te yo na te yak bo yen sare samne teni tan chambalang ga mo chama sam gares.
Of course, this isn't to be blamed. You know, any kind of person, people everywhere, going from a state of relative poverty to all of a sudden having access to all kinds of unprecedented wealth, most people would believe that these are things they should pursue or that these are things that will bring happiness.
딘디그 삼로즈 드니 삼바즈 용나 때 큰 문득다 있나 때 덴바레타 마리티 짐슨 요레타 요 마르스나 때 짐슨 요 마리 노랑 오마티 테레 마토바 나초 나마 삼로티 노라 마리즈.
While this kind of view may not be unreasonable, nevertheless we need to look at whether or not it is true. In fact, whether the idea that material accumulation will bring happiness is in fact not true, and it is not true that the way that life was led in Tibet was inferior.
Tani habta kachi kolmo mamboza tani lagla yung jana tani ta kanti she gomo ko ni tani khamba zigbo japche langkhor zigbo nyo ji tani ta ngacho tani gorwu pamjur kyobo yung khanga mata sola tani ga tani ta hajang mambo yung gore ti pobachi bo mare salayana yung godus.
Of course, there are lots of people everywhere, anyone really going from a state of not having much to all of a sudden having access to a lot would think that the thing to do is buy a big house, invest in cars, and pursue material accumulation.
Ti samlo to tini to norware karti ti samlo ti Jesus sona tani nga so ngune tane nyimasila demo chipo yung ikorko yozena te me tachores.
However, this kind of reasoning is extremely mistaken. And if we think that pursuing this kind of approach will one day bring us happiness, we're extremely, extremely in error.
Jete te nga so tani pamjur go mare nga so choyar jinro go mare je ti kaja mare je to go re te ina ta hachang ti tak tak la tani samlo tan ti chipo te ma to jamba chi chi ka ke samlo ta ya me ba tin dis chak so na tani ta non chang go ma ti tin na ne yong gres.
Of course, again, we're not saying that we don't need to have an economic basis in lifestyle or that money is not important. However, if we solely devote our energies and efforts to making money, then we are bound never to achieve happiness.
Tendi yen sarti tini nga so perna tini ta America la yung na tini ta soso tini chi khangba yen na da langkhor yen na da te so yo go re ta yen na ha lepa ga tini ti
So whilst in coming to America, yes, people need a car, they need a house to live in. By focusing too excessively on these things is not good at all.
Teni nga so boba ga teni ngama ga teni samlo te ngune tane teni ta nga so tirim ni sa chik ba ga na la ta yong na te hali ba ngun thong ga samlo ren do se.
Actually, our traditional Tibetan approach to these things, when looked at from the point of view of the 21st century, is in fact quite modern.
Ti gimsang ka rezena tini nga so bo ka tini ji muruk ti hali pa tini ji samji ma chi pa zi yim bi gimsang rezena mareze kang rezena nga so samlo ti so sama sarje sha cha ta pa chu na ni yong bi samlo yim bi gimsang ji tini nga so samlo to hon ton re so reze.
The reason that this traditional approach of Tibet was in fact such a progressive one was not on account of it belonging to the Tibetan people and therefore being so wonderful. It was the fact that this approach of the Tibetan people was an embodiment of the Buddhist teachings, and on this basis it was so progressive.
Teni nga so chowa ker sa te America la chowa ker na teni samlo to teni nga so teni ngama ga teni samlo to ti to ne sona.
So what would be really great is if we led our livelihoods here the American way, but kept our values and viewpoints in accordance with the traditional Tibetan approach.
ngaso pakpa ndok manjawan jawo ta tini chi tini yang tini chi tini yewa mambo shini chi gyata po ta tini nashok ze anjawa ta ta tini yewa mambo re ma to ba shetang mu tamchi ku tini sim gu samluk ta so myen sati chama chik bare.
And this idea is not something that Tibetans alone should just pursue. It's something that's equally relevant and equally applicable to all people, regardless of what ethnicity they are or what the color of their skin is. It's an approach that is universally applicable to all humans.
Tani ngacho teni ta ngune tani teni demo ta ke po so rang la dechit yongwa ti gemsung ngomati kare sena teni chukshi ge samlo o tan jikend ta nga ya po shong tan de dis nga rekend tele go madu sambi chukshi ge samlo te rendu se ngune tani ge dechit ke chora yongya ngomati te rendu se.
Really, what the ultimate source of our happiness is knowing how to be content, knowing when it's enough, knowing when we already have what we need. This sense of contentment is really where our happiness will lie.
Tani te ngacho chu na ngama ne teni ta shajang dos.
And this, of course, was wisdom known long ago in our religious tradition.
Teni ngarang la samlo tampai na tambo teni chula lojong she pine kamna o teni chukshi zerati teni ngacho teni dewa chama ga chaware zi teni shayo pati ngacho la lojong she reta di ka s ngacho kare samje na ina ta tu ngacho che ti chaban ra ta teni ze yingi re ma to pa chama ta ina andra sambo teni samlo ngacho yo tambo lojong she pine kamna ngarang la ya teni shong song ze.
That
Ting ngacho shertang ngacho chu na la tini chokshi zeyati tini ngacho tini demo ke po yong ya ga tsawang ma te tin sone song yo res tini ngarang ra pola sam lo ta na ngama lojong shipi kaps o ta chokshi zeyati dewa tsawa yong zeyati ngacho chaban ra rap tu shong ra te tin jin ja yin ge re wo ma to ba chama ta tin yin sam song se.
So the idea that contentment is the source of all happiness is something that many people, and in fact Khenpo, when he first began his studies, thought that was something that was only really applicable to, say, monks or people who were in renunciates.
Tani tarta ngacho tani ta dan zambalang ga shashok ta no shok tani lordji mambo ta tini manam ko semkham ko tini Gyalwa tila tini to samlo mambo tang tini mambo ta tini shi yondi o tang uni jane to te rapshung ta chapa chambas ko ton tak remd musla yana te rendus.
However, now looking at the situation of people everywhere, whether in the East or the West, we can see that this is a wisdom, or that this is a kind of logic that applies equally to everyone anywhere.
Tani ta nga chum do pati te chanjum shi go na kan ri chanjum shi go re jina tini nga chu gum gyab go re s gum gyab ni tani so so sem ga na do pati te mar chungya ra wo tini shi go re te gum ma gyab na nga chum dom ban do ya chi po ta tani shang cha ya chi po te yong go ma re.
If we're going to go about reducing our desire or keeping it in check, then we really need to engage in meditational practice. Just doing recitations alone or prostrations, etc., is really not going to help us to bring down our desire.
Teni nga chu dana yongken terang dana yongken ko popa so na te simla yakpon joro chi nga chu ta marcha pomo ina gum de inda manda jab go res.
Everybody here tonight, I hope that you can really take this to heart. Lay people, lay members of the community need to practice meditation.
Teni ngeti nga chu boba jini je go wi gemsen te kare jena nga chu boba ga phair la nga chu bol la yo pi ne kamna gandhi zer jena marcha phomo cho gum mambo jab ka mare je.
And the reason that I address this comment especially to the Tibetans is because back home in Tibet, not many members of the lay community do engage in meditational practice.
Teni nga chu chaba chu ta lama chu teni gum gyab ka re ma to pa teni gum gyab ji ki to o nga chu marcha phomo to ndak mare sam ni nga chu teni sam trik re.
A lot of people think that meditation is something that monks and lamas do, and not that it's not an activity that lay people engage in.
This
is in fact nonsense. It's completely not the case, and everybody should engage in meditation practice. Well, it's like if a lama eats food and feels full as a result, but you're not eating full. If you're not eating, then the fact that the lama is full is of no benefit to you.
대인데 되니 라마 저거 금잡나 거랑 소가랑 저 금잡으려 마다바 저저 금잡 먹고 봐 님선 찍지요 말해.
And similarly, if a lama is practicing meditation, then that is his thing and the benefit is his. It's got no relation or to your own meditational practice.
레데테 저저 균 말이지. 좀 맞아 보고 균 리면도지. 대 체레지나 대 라마 저거 par 곱다터 고레다. 대 곱다 마트 바리테 저저 균 말이지.
But of course, this isn't your fault for thinking like this. This is actually a failure of the monastic tradition and lamas to communicate this properly.
This
is in fact our fault. It's our shortcoming. We haven't told you that you need to practice. We haven't instructed you to meditate.
Teni ta gomgyab gojinda nyamlin shego anda teso hamagona te khayo mareze o ta ma cha pomo go samare doso samalama so lekin sare nga choda go samare samna tendi samna te khag manduzi cho khayo mare.
So for this reason you're not to be blamed for feeling that you don't need to meditate or that meditational practice is not something that lay people should engage in.
Rete ta ti tanga kang yin na yin ta panchni nga so samara te gilchu gyamni teni kyoso yinda ma da gomgyab lojong yak poji teni lojongji nga chu namba ga teni tawa tang shopa ta gomba so la lojong yak poji gom yak po gyobzi kyoso ge.
However, this is how things have been in the past. Now, at this point, we really need to reform the way things are, and from this point on, everybody needs to study the Dharma and engage in practice.
다 된다와서 그때는 가서 야근 나라양 때니 때 추냠len 시비네 금나 지때니 분초야 다오다 지때니 또 소란답네 때니 다 든지라 마토바 곰 머겸 kan 그때니 추바양 영큰 때니 지때 곰야 머겸 그때니 망보요레 대양 저거마리 곰잡고래 때니 로종시고래 곰잡고래스.
And this advice also applies to, say, Chinese people who also don't engage in meditational practice, just making offerings, incense offerings, supplications to deities, etc. Everyone needs to engage in meditation.
Teni navshukla nga halipa charjiyo marezing hame charji meta yinang par nyanna parchi teni navshukho maso teni tawata teni chula teni ju lojong shejinda nyamlin gomgyab jinda teso gabo yorezi teni zegendu tena pe yagbore teni gores.
And I don't have an excellent familiarity with the situation in the West, but I've been told that Westerners do engage in study of the Dharma and do like to engage in meditational practice. This is very good.
That tendishini ngacho to gomgyabne soso ndopatela te chanjim shejit teni ngacho ta demo tan kepo yongya ga teni 소화가 나랑아서 남비 추티니 가디냠스 렌지나 대냠링 시스르가 탑시스틱 데레스.
So by doing meditational practice is one way that we can work on reducing or keeping our desires in check so that our lives increase in happiness.
Tani 탑시 니바데 강레즈나 tani ngaso tani 더 소화가 나라 남긴 tani 더다 And the
second way that we can increase in happiness in our lives is by really working on engendering the altruistic mind to be of benefit to others. Actually, in terms of this, Tibetans are quite good.
약보다 강리제나 페나가서 대랑다 보이나야 당가서 상마가더니 심진 탐시폴라더니 더 더니 잠팡가 레칼레고레 잠팡가 삼로탄고 레제 니티니 샤나 더니 포바지나 참마 오티 고레 젠켄즈 마토바 더 간디 고레 네테 고위 짐선 체레제 더니 젠칸요 마레스.
When I say that Tibetans are quite good in this respect, I mean it insofar as, for example, tonight, if I talk about the need to be of benefit to other people, the need to be of benefit to other beings, there would be no one among the Tibetans who would question why this was necessary or, question whether or not this was a sound approach. And the fact that there is such widespread acceptance of the need of this approach in the Tibetan community is due to the kindness of our parents, of our culture, and our lamas.
당아서 김성 그 돈에 르피 종르 그 돈에 가서 또 고그레 잔라 판바 체고레 잔라 판바 레카 레고레 살로 땅고레 땡아서 켈랭거리타 옛날 동고 무보 라랭 그 돈에 가서 알티야볼 대지 용고 요메 참아요레스.
However, whilst there is widespread acceptance of the principle of needing to be of benefit to others, whether in fact in actual practice people do this is something that there may be a greater discrepancy in respect of.
근데 인디티니 다 판정가 주직도 디토라 상로 땅니 참아 되니 잔라 판바가 되니 직되니 다 삼로 땅야 잔라 판바가 레칼이야 잔라 판바가 까자샤야
So from this point onwards, everybody should really work towards being of benefit to others in terms of everything they do, from the thoughts that they harbour in their minds to the words that they speak and the actions that they undertake with their bodies. And this is advice that applies again equally to everyone, regardless of whether they're Tibetan, Chinese or Western. However, in this respect, we do have a mistaken view.
Jang tondala tini samlo mawtang leka male rang deya tang keya leka te lena tani rang demo tang kepo yongre samne tindi samlo changmala yores.
The mistaken view is that we are so self-oriented, always working for our own best interests or our own happiness, feeling that in the belief that by working for these things that our own happiness will be generated.
Tani khabar azo tangsang tani zambalang ka nvel shoglayangre shar shoglayangre lobjag nang tani te lobso to so nangla ta ti pe na rang tini golmo tina rang mawati rang tini thoyata tani chi shawaz lekaz lena tani shawa yakpo to rang thoyata tinji go thola samlo tani tinji go thola thapshi tini shiluk tani rigpa shir tani tak tak lob go yoreze tani lobta so nangla.
And a large reason for this is the kind of education that is delivered in schools these days, which teaches people to pursue knowledge and other things, their careers, etc., all for their own interests.
Tani example ala tani to shikin chimbo yongkan ko tani pe na chapter ko tone jarko soso zhenzhen jaboda tani hwanjur ko tone tani chi to ta example ko tani to tobdun ko chongba ngabja ya rawo tani shije ubai chang tani rawo ta tani chi to ta charig pa ta so sangma tani example ala shikin chimbo yongkan to so lobtan to so na ne yong go yores.
In the world today, the most influential and powerful people in political realms, economic realms, the richest, the 500 richest people, etc., are all graduates of higher institutions of education.
Tani lobtan to so na ne tani jampam ko tani samlo to tani to loso yakpo jab kapsho yakpo ma shina tani mot so lobtan na ni thon chari ner kamna hale pa nipa chepo yore tani korang rigpa chabo chammo tindi yore rete mamambozala jampang ko sambate yomares.
But the education that they have received in these institutions means that even though they are extremely intelligent, when they graduate, unfortunately, they don't have a particularly strong altruistic mind of benefiting others.
Danita Jampang ko tani samlo tezi yongken da to so changma to tani to ta nipa jik menken zambalang ko thola tani shikin menken ta tani ko kora de rendo yores.
And it will become a situation where, in fact, those people who do, in fact, have a mind to benefit others are those who are the less powerful or those of lower status in society.
Tani zambalang la shikin chepo te zambalang kalu gir tani example la wang ger tani shegen de kan so tani lobja na ne yong tani lobja na la jampang ko tani loso me tani ri chati Tani nga chon zambalang thamche poteni jan la samlo motang kan soso ger la samlo tang kan rang la samlo tang kan tak tak ren do re.
And as a result of this, people who do go to good schools and go through the education system, as a result of not receiving proper education in altruistically benefiting others, become people who think of nothing but themselves and serving their own selfish interests.
Tani tenji ge samlo ta maybe gimsenji tani nga cho tar nga yin na zambalang ga thola tani jin amang chig ram mambo yone tani the chagol pe mambo tani shi charre ta maumba na tani mayong se kona pe kharbores.
And it's precisely because there is this lack of an altruistic mindset and a very selfish set of values that prevails, that we have a situation in the world today with so many wars and disasters taking place, and it's very difficult to see this situation becoming better in the future.
Tani zambalang ga tani thola tani nurshuk la yin na tani nurshuk chi yarji ta nguntun ta chi samlo ta kang ga thone yin na nguntun re charwan da so yin na lorji ga thola ta yin na tani tani ga jampang ga samlo ta maybe gimsenji tani ramnyim mayim ba da tani ga leka pe dgpo tani choshu mambo len do wazi.
So we can see that in the history of Western countries, which are today very economically ascendant, etc., that in the course of their histories, all kinds of actions have been undertaken which contravened equality and were not in the interests of others.
Tani tarong yang tani maong ba na ta nga chu tani che ga mare ze go na pe khabore tarong yang tani yongwa ga nyin ka yores.
And to say, well, from this point we're not going to do that any further is extremely difficult. It's entirely likely that this behavior will continue.
Tani yendi tani jampang ga samlo ze ya tani nga chon zambalang la tani nguni tani ga demo che po yongya ga sa ngomati tere tena tenga chu sangma ga tani ta thomar ha go res.
So it's extremely important that everybody realizes that having the mind to benefit others is in fact a primary cause of happiness.
Tani hako achamji tani chokoyo mari tani nga chu nyamlin she go re laglin she go res.
And knowing it is not enough. Having understood it, we really need to put it into practice.
Tani laglin che na tani ta gandhi che go re zena nga chu tari kong do shapi ndopa chunjun she ya tela tani nga chu nangba ga nangla tani ngimjung gomba zene tani gomba tani yore te gom go re te so gum jamna tani ya bo yong gore laglin ya bo yong gore.
So in order to do this, we need to work on reducing our desires, and in order to do this, we can meditate on cultivating renunciation.
Teni nipati teni nga cho teni ta shamda nyarji teni gomsar teni nga cho nangba teni thakpa chimbu chu nala sham nyarji gomba rawota shamchim ko sem gomsar teni ga teni ta gom nyamling teni shya teni pe mambo yore teni ta so tej changma ga nyamling she to mo to ta go re.
And in addition to meditation on renunciation, in the Buddhist tradition there are also numerous meditation methods on loving kindness and compassion, and these are methods and styles of meditation that everybody would be urged to learn.
Teni yendi teni so to ti thola samlo tani nyamlin te she thamna tani so chin di thola yang ke bo yong gore che shema la ke bo yong gore.
And if everyone were able to engage in these practices, then not only would they achieve really some real happiness in this lifetime, they would also be sowing the seeds for happiness in future lifetimes.
Teni mat changma ga so rang ga teni ta tej teni che to jala phan tho che ga teni je pamjun ra teni ga nipa yo na teni pamjur ko thone jala teni ta phan tho pa teni gorwo yin na teni che teni jobo teni gandhi yin na teni tsola teni phan tej to ya la thola dang jab go re gormo mambo me na kyong mari tej nyong le me na ta te yin na teni so samba chon ya re te pe yabu yo re.
And in addition to this, if people have the financial capacity to do so, then acting to benefit others in the society, people in poverty, etc., is a wonderful thing to do. Of course, one doesn't need to be rich to be able to do this. One can exercise this generosity in accordance with one's situation.
Tani karti tani sosola tani pamjur ko thoni tani ta chi jichimbo mena takashi se ko ta ngata pamjur yo mari nge jampang le ka le thap ko mari samna te mari ze jampang le ka le azi ki te pamjur yo na pamjur ko le na chokore karti pamjur mena tani soso ko tani jampang le ka le na gansa kan la ya na tani lesser mampu yo res.
Some people might think that if they don't have money, then they can't do actions that are of benefit to others, but this is absolutely not the case. In addition to being able to benefit people in economic ways, there are a myriad other kinds of ways that we can be of benefit to others.
Tani shertang nga so nangba ga tinin to nangla yin nangba sanji pa ga nangla yin paru tu shimba drig zeni ju jimba jin ya ta to so thola tini sha ki kha ga mangbu su sha yo res.
In the Buddhist tradition, among Buddhists, we talk a lot, we give a lot of lip service to the importance of generosity in the 6 perfections.
Yena dong ko thoni ti nga so ngoni te ji pe na yishi chulung ra on so na tini pe yabo tini to shiso ko tini to shiso la phamba de ya da shipang ga le ka tini ko so mambo ngama ya mambo lendu ta yang tini mambo lendu tin ra wo tini nga so tini rigbi jong ko thoni mambo she yo re ta yenda nga tini to lagling ko thoni mambo tini to leke te te nyong ra bores.
However, despite the amount that we go on about the importance of generosity, we have not necessarily put it in practice to the same extent that other religious traditions have, such as the Christian tradition, which has engaged in beneficial work for others in society in history, and it continues to do so today.
Ta ngarang rang da tini demo ta kepo yong ya ga samlo ta ne tindi sheda na ngarang demo yong sambi samlo tin norware tani ngune ta ni rang demo kepo yong ya te gare zena ta jian namla tini demo kepo yong ya te nge kanti she go ze nge jampan ta kanti drab go samji samlo to nam tindi samlo zo yong la tani so rang tini demo kepo go te tini tsbares.
Often we think that our own happiness, that happiness is going to be fulfilled when we are able to fulfill the things that we think will bring our own happiness. In actual fact, the true cause of happiness is when we start to concern ourselves for the happiness of others.
Tenti yendi teni ti thola ta so teni gum nyamlen teni yapoche tenti yona te karchim bore na te na so teni ta tela teni semna lan jang go re rete yenda nga so gum jawya te 당보 맞죠 로종 제거 그래 마도 바 로종 마시나 되니 곰 간지 잡고 그래 되니 정말 로종 제거 그래.
So engaging in meditational practice will be of great benefit to us, but before we do this, of course, we need to study and learn about what we're meditating on and why we need to do it.
되니 가서 때랑다나 요 바가 되니 보바 양만 보스 되니 보바 졸랑가 묵서 그 돈다 숨샤지요스.
So tonight there are a lot of Tibetans in the audience, and I would like to raise 3 points in respect of you.
Teni ton popa main na shetang mi longba na la denken ke murgsgin na sin na rapori popa chipo main na jampa yang teni gogres.
Of course, these points are not just relevant to Tibetans, they're relevant to anybody here in the audience.
Teni tondak simti na ne tondak tangbo de gare jena pe na ngaso boban da na rang teni sane teni thonne mi longba pe na America ta wazla dingna da Europe ta wazla dingna da yana sacha jamba zla dingna da gangdang kanglan dingna da dorna rang fire ni yongni mi sacha la denking go tindi go moz yin sarti yinda manda tondak simte la teni ta samlo tang go res.
So the first point pertains to or relates to Tibetans who have arrived in another place, like here in America or in Europe, but also to anyone who finds themselves leaving their original place, their homeland, and living in another place.
Teni tonda tambo de kangrezina teni ngacho America la yona da sacha jambaz la yona da ganga yona da teni sacha tela yopi teni chumdang na teni sacha tela yopi rigne dang na teni sacha tela yopi teni to lecture ta tsola lecture tang tsola teni to zunjok yang tak ba teni to che go re yang tak ba chung go re je pe na chum yak bo chung je da teni so so na teni pe na lecture ka de gang yo na te so lecture to so teni to yak bo teni she ne te la zunjok yak bo she je te go re.
The first point is that the importance of respecting the laws, cultural practices, and traditions of the society we newly find ourselves in.
Pena America tawlo na mo karbo yang tu mo nakbo yang tu tini te pena susu la ringni mo karbo ringni na mo nakbo ringni na mo serbo ngasong ra otila mo sero zegere mo sero ringni na ja ringni kangdang kang na ja tini tapa yang tini ta America te tapa jada manjang yore tini na korang chu chul tapa kang shinken zegena ti tapa te chola zunjok ya boche go gres ko chu zunjok ya boche go gres.
We need to be able to exercise respect to the different cultures and cultural backgrounds of everyone in America, those cultural practices of white populations, black populations, yellow populations like ourselves.
Teni soso teni te luchur kandang ko na tesola zunjok ya bo shi ji dang teni pe na Tana teni sangja yen na ja gangdang kang ko shone yen na teni te sacha te tang thumbu ya bo su go re ma to sacha te tang monthon ba ta mo te tang monthon ba teni chang shi na teni reg ma re.
And in addition to having respect, for example, for different religious backgrounds in society, we also need to respect the different customs and practices that are prevalent in society. And this is the first point I'd like to make.
Teni tonda nipala teni ta mo rgni la teni sunjok shi go re te yina rang rgni ti yinda manda teni ta tambu zongni teni ta mar manyam ba ta teni ta jinzn ya bo shi go res.
The second point is, while respecting the tradition of the new culture that we find ourselves living in, at the same time we need to ensure that we protect and maintain our own cultural traditions.
Di teni nga zo teni pena teni to bu chong chong cho yena inji shi go re te halipa karchim bo re te tang nyam de teni nga zo so so teni ka tang ye te yinda man da shi go res.
So in respect of young children, whilst learning English is of course something that they need to do, at the same time they absolutely need to know and have proficiency in their own native language.
Teni bugu chong chong chola porko lob gona teni nga chola kangri orezi na kangri orezi ta teni lob tang na la je pop pa teni porko jang sa lob tang da teni me teni yang sa ti so so lob gona teni to kavli orezi.
Whether young children in American society find it difficult to learn Tibetan, well, of course, yes, there are challenges. Challenges, for example, having to go to schools, American schools, where the predominant language is English.
Kavli country ona ti thola teni so so teni ta kavli ti so par kangr ti so par khat san ni yinda manda teni ta katang yige teni yakbo shiba tang na teni po ka ringni ti teni ta lecture ti so re ta samlo ti so sem ka nala yakbo shinkan teni zi yong go res.
However, notwithstanding the challenges that exist, it's important that they be absolutely surmounted, and that young Tibetans learn the Tibetan language and also the Tibetan cultural tradition.
Teni te nge boba kyangpo zi men se ngarang la samlo ta na nga murig ranglik pa zi mare zi teni pe na boba yenari yayenari nashok pa zi na so so rang la rigni ramata yore thama murig se na rawo res.
In saying this, I'm not being an ethnic chauvinist, a nationalist, saying that this is the case for Tibetans alone. This is in fact a logic or a reasoning that applies equally to everyone.
Teni khabar teni nga cho teni to bok teni to ti ringni to chu to nangba ga teni samlo ren do zi teni nangba ga samlo yin charti teni mo jan la teni chu to phan thoyang da ta mo jan la no pa ma she pa da o ta teni ringni te tin na la shikchin yo re to yin na changma la phan thok re ne teni ti yinda man da teni ringni to rang ringni to manyam ba she go res.
The importance, in particular to the Tibetan cultural tradition, stems from the fact that it is an embodiment of the Buddhist teachings, which are about benefiting others and not harming others. Thus, their particular importance to humanity.
되니 대 파마초고 인담만다 겐커고 그래서
This is a responsibility that parents really need to take on.
되니 대 돈당이 바인스
And this is my second point.
되니 돈당 선바디 강레즈나 가서 사차 강당 강라 능나양 되니 사차 띠나니 페나가서 깔리겸니 고르모 드르네 되니 고르모 테저라 손디 되니 띠나니 되니 카시서 되니 또 사차 띠나라 파르 되니 또 사차 띠멀나라 되니 파 판도야가 나라 동고 그래서
The third point is that in our new place that we live, we need to use some of the wealth that we generate to benefit people in the immediate society in which we're living.
되니 아메리카 따위나 되니 또 참아 뭐식보 따다 말해야지 뭐 교부 되니도와 되나 되니 뭐 교부 돼서 강나 요나양 되니 대소라 되니 록바시야 되니 지 고르모다 밤줄 그 돈이 야침부스 요르고지나 테즈 카보인제리타티 야치 총고 돈다 말해지 또 강타르 데 뇽뇽을 질레 메나양 강타르 가서 되니 소소가 삼바티님 총야가 체트 되니 또다 슈소고 가서 게리 스샷 되니 초판지나 풀리 어떠서고나라 양니 인담만다 지고래 가서 양티 슈소콜레카티나라 참마 지고 그래서
American society is, after all, not just comprised of people who are wealthy. There are lots of poor people, so it's very important that we engage in work that supports charitable and welfare institutions. Of course, not necessarily in an extremely lavish way, but in accordance with our own means and capabilities.
야, 대돈덕 선바레스.
And this is the third point.
되니 텔레잠바 때랑 가서 다 대랑 그 차트도 되니 되니 참조지연 되니 참마가 야본 연송 지치스